Are you seeing an evil slave described here? This blew my mind when I read that. This is this afternoon that I discovered this. I was just like, "Oh
All
my
right,
god."
I'm going to analyze a claim made by Jehovah's Witness governing body. I'm here at the local Kingdom Hall. This is really close to my house. And what the governing body says is that every Kingdom Hall and all the congregants the world over are supposed to obey the governing body members because they are God's faithful and discreet slave. And in fact, they're the same faithful slave that's mentioned in Matthew 24 by Jesus. They're saying, hey, that's us. You need to obey us because obeying us is synonymous with obeying Jehovah's direction here on earth. So what I'm going to do is analyze that statement, that claim, and see if there's any possibility. I'm going to play, let's call it the devil's advocate, any possibility that that claim could maybe be true, and if there's any evidence that it is completely nonsense. So I'm going to do that today, and I'm going to go back and do it in my office. I'm not going to do it all here because it is really nippy out, and I forgot my jacket. All right, see you back in the office.
Okay, I'm back in my office. Here we go. Let's answer this question. Is there any real historical, scholarly, or biblical evidence to support the Jehovah's Witness governing body claim that they are God's one true channel with the earth? And I'm not questioning their sincerity. The governing body, they very well may believe what they teach. I'm not attacking people. I'm just looking for the evidence here. So here's the question. Is there any real evidence? Before we even get into the Bible, I want to frame how claims like this can work. And I'm not saying yet, but I've done the research already. Like, it's literally a bit like saying, I am Superman. And then someone asks, how do we know that you're Superman? Well, you know that Superman never lies, right? Well, I never would lie about being Superman. So I guess the point is, there must be evidence outside the claim itself. And so that's what we're going to dive in and see if there really is evidence outside of the governing body's claim. Okay, so here we go. Now, the scripture that the governing body has built this claim on is Matthew chapter 24, verses 45 through 51. And let's read this. Now, I read this, I remember so many times as a JW, but today was the first time I've read this since I've left the organization. And it's kind of like when you see kids doing of course, we never did this, but when you see kids doing the Pledge of Allegiance, they're just doing it because they do it every morning in class. They're not thinking about what it means every time they do it. This scripture meant so much more to me when I read it outside the org. And in fact, I'm a non-believer, but I still think it has extreme value here. And I'm not putting down Christians or the Bible in this video here. I'm just literally saying, this is what the scripture says. Let's look at it objectively instead of what we've always been told it means. Here it goes. Who really is the faithful and discreet slave, whom his master appointed over his domestics to give them their food at the proper time? Okay, Jesus asks a rhetorical question. Happy is that slave if his master, on coming, finds him doing so. Truly I say to you, he will appoint him over all his belongings. But if that evil slave says in his heart, my master is delaying, and he starts to beat his fellow slaves, and he eats and drinks with the confirmed drunkards, well, then the master of that slave will come on a day he does not expect, and then he'll punish him, is what it wraps up with. So, notice a few things. Jesus asks a question. Jesus asks a question. He does not make a prediction. This is a question. He names no group that is the faithful slave. He gives no date when they would appear. He gives no organization to which they'd be attached. He gives no succession plan to where you could identify them. Faithfulness here is even conditional, not guaranteed. So the faithful slave might be evil, and you should keep an eye on him, is basically what's being said. The entire warning centers on one idea: abuse of authority during a delay waiting for Jesus to return. Then, hop over to Luke. Luke's gospel, he has a parallel here, and he says, this is where it gets really important because Luke records the same teaching, but with extra detail that Matthew did not include. In Luke's account, Peter interrupts Jesus and asks a direct question. Lord, are you telling this illustration for us or for everyone? That question matters. This would be the moment for Jesus to say, oh, oh, yeah, this is a specific soul channel that I'm talking about. This was a perfect time to identify who he's talking about because he was directly asked. Jesus does not identify anyone. Instead, he shifts the focus completely. He explains, let's see here, he explains that anyone given authority will be judged more severely. More responsibility, it's like Spider-Man rules. More responsibility, great power comes with great responsibility. And in Luke's version, there is no exclusive class. There is no unique channel. There is no group guaranteed approval. Authority increases risk, not privilege. So Luke turns this teaching into a warning to leaders, not an appointment or anointment of leaders. This matters because the governing body interpretation only works if you read Matthew alone and you ignore Luke altogether. Isn't that interesting? I did not know that before doing this research on this. So they've ignored Luke's version. Now, another thing that is critical is to understand who Matthew was written for. And of course, I knew that the Bible wasn't entirely chronological, but I always thought the books were written in order. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were written as once, and then Paul's letters came after that. And that isn't true. And I've learned that a few years ago since I left the organization. Just never really thought about it before. Whether or not they're aware, it doesn't matter. But the point is that Thessalonians, the first Thessalonians that Paul wrote, that letter, it was written decades before the book of Matthew was penned. So this is what Paul says. Paul says in the first Thessalonians, he says, we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, and he goes on to talk, who are left until the coming of the Lord. Paul thought he was going to be around still when Jesus returned. He thought he was going to come back soon. Bible scholars agree with this across the systems. Early Christians expected to see Jesus return in their lifetime. And that matters because Matthew isn't predicting a modern organization. Matthew is responding to a great disappointment. And this is not criticism of Christians. This is just a fact that early Christians thought Jesus was coming back in their lifetime. And that is evidenced by 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. In fact, in 2nd Thessalonians, if you read that book, you notice the tone has changed. Whether or not it was definitely written by Paul or someone finished or completely written by somebody in the Pauline fashion, as they say, it isn't really critical to this argument. Because by the time 2nd Thessalonian comes, that's the letter to this Thessalonians, the second one comes around, something's changed. And the tone is calming people down. He warns believers not to be alarmed, no, it hasn't already happened. No. Chill, patience, stability, relax. He will come eventually. Why? Because Jesus hadn't returned yet. And that was a tone that had changed then. And so by the time Matthew was written, they were deep into that. Imagine we were expecting, if Jesus died in 1975 and we were expecting him back in like 1981, and then here it is 2026 and he still hasn't come. What is the tone for that? People are going to be upset, but it was even worse than that for the first century Christians. And we'll go into that real quick here too. This is what it was like to be a first century Christian. Yeah, 50 years after Jesus died, roughly, he hasn't returned. The temple has been destroyed in Jerusalem. The apostles that met Jesus face to face are dying. The congregations disagree on doctrines. We can see that this is not me making stuff up. That's written throughout Paul's writings. He's spending all his time trying to unite the doctrines. Oh no, circumcision. You don't need to do that. Oh, that Mosaic law. No, don't worry about it. He's constantly doing that. You can see it in the scriptures itself. This is not something that's new to any of us. And now leadership in each individual congregation and region, and because they're so far apart and it's so hard to travel, leadership is taking over in each one of them. You can see the beginnings of how we now have so many religions, but that profess to be Christian. So Matthew emphasizes this quote, "My master is delaying," teaching. This passage in Matthew 24 is to restrain authority in the congregations, not to justify it or identify it. All of Matthew, the faithful and discreet slave, and then there being an evil slave, it's a parable to say, hey, make sure you take care of my congregation while I'm gone. It is not an appointment of a modern day governing body. Okay, so we've listened to the scriptures here that they try to use, but what does the governing body really use as evidence to support that they truly are God's one and only true channel? Well, first, there's their interpretation of Matthew, which we discussed, but that requires that they ignore Luke. And the interpretation that they have, that's their evidence. Second, we have their whole argument about 1914 and 1919. They say that Jesus started ruling in heaven in 1914. And in 1919, he analyzed his domestics and went, oh, those are the guys that are doing it right. And I pick them. They're my channel. They're my faithful slave. Well, the years, first of all, are wrong because they didn't even have. They were basing all that off of weeks of years and all that garbage, off of the math from the destruction of Jerusalem. Well, Jerusalem wasn't destroyed when they thought it was. It's the old 587 607 argument. And in fact, it was destroyed 20 years later. So really, all their numbers were off by 20 years. It should have been 1934 and 1939. So they didn't have that correct. And of course, this is not historically accepted by anybody. Scholars do not ever look at the Bible and go, yeah, it must have been these guys, which I guess if they're worldly, that's to be expected. But third, the growth and unity of the organization, they always cite that. Well, look how they're taking care of Jesus' domestics, his organization. Look at it. We're unified world over. We're preaching all over the earth and we're growing. Well, you know who else is doing that? Is the Mormons. They're growing all over the earth, preaching all over the earth, and they have about twice the members of Jehovah's Witnesses. So that's out the door too. Finally, spiritual food at the proper time. Are they teaching correct things? No, they've been teaching incorrect things. All that they always have new light. Oh, never mind. Oh, no, 1975 was wrong. Oh, no, 1914 was wrong. It wasn't. The end wasn't coming then. They have gotten so many things wrong, all the way from that to I could have been lost my privileges of giving public talks 10 years ago when I was giving public talks because of this facial hair, and now it would be fine. How can truth change? How is error evidence of divine direction? It certainly isn't. And to wrap this up, here is the irony, and this is so important. In its original context, this parable is not about granting authority. It is about limiting authority. It is exactly the opposite of what the governing body have claimed. Jesus was warning about what happens when leaders believe that they are untouchable because the master is delayed. The warning is not trust the servant no matter what. The warning is watch the servant carefully. The servant is judged, not praised. If he claims authority during delay, if he elevates himself over others, if he punishes fellow servants, if he demands obedience. Are you seeing an evil slave described here? This blew my mind when I read that. This is this afternoon that I discovered this. I was just like, oh my God. The passage, which was meant to restrain power, is now being used to concentrate power. In fact, remember when the faithful and discreet slave was everybody who was anointed? And then maybe was that 20 years ago? They went, it's not everybody in the congregations. It's just us here, the governing body. They're pulling power in. They're saying, I am Superman. Believe me, for I cannot lie. That's self-authorization. And I learned a lot from researching this. And I hope it was at least entertaining to you. All right. So we're coming back next week with my special guest. And we're going to have a nice new conversation, super positive, about how great it is to rebuild chosen family outside the org. Please do like and subscribe and share with other people or dislike it if you hate it. I don't know. Have a good night, guys.